We're just going to say the first thing that comes to our mind, like good xenophobes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast, the weekly podcast dedicated to conversations on faith and culture. We are your hosts. I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. This week, we are having a conversation about xenophobia. And after our conversation, we will be bringing back a segment from our 6th episode called Say What. So
Say
the reason
what?
Say what?
I got excited, sorry. What are we talking about, Jeff?
I don't know about you guys, but I think everyone ought to be afraid of Xena because the warrior princess was fearsome and terrifying to all of her enemies, and she had cool costumes.
Oh my gosh.
Wasn't that a great show?
Is that a joke? Xena's awesome. Xena was so cool.
Yeah.
Alan, you were one to talk about bad jokes.
Yeah, I know.
I know.
You cannot make fun of anybody.
I'm trying to turn my image around, all right? You guys don't have to stop me.
Turn around every now and then.
So xenophobia is not the fear of Xena, warrior princess, though she is fearsome. Xeno comes from the Greek word for stranger. So it's just the fear of the stranger, people from different countries, people who are determined to be outsiders. And so that's what xenophobia is.
And we figured this would be a really good topic, a relevant topic, considering all the stuff that's in the news. Immigration seems to be a large point of contention, especially with people like Donald Trump out there speaking their thoughts. And
what did he say?
What didn't he say?
What does he not say?
We could do a whole episode on Trump, but he doesn't deserve our recognition.
He's fired.
Yes,
That's right. Did you know who who replaced him on The Apprentice?
Who?
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
No way.
An immigrant?
Yeah. And not only that, but he can't say fired. He has to say you're terminated now, right? Like you have to switch it.
You have to.
It just has
Have
to.
you guys seen the Vine compilation of Arnold Schwarzenegger driving?
No, that's not him driving. That's
I know it's
Will
not
Sasso.
him.
Will Sasso was hilarious, and he was one of the original Viners. But yeah, he's pretending to be Arnold. It's pretty. He actually drives by my old house, Mona, when I lived in Pasadena.
No way.
In one of the videos. Yeah, it was really weird.
That's awesome.
That's pretty
That's
cool.
a funny compilation.
So Donald Trump, and actually I think it was Ben Carson too, they said like Muslims shouldn't be president. Obviously Trump's been saying things about how horrible immigrants are coming from Mexico and other places, and it's becoming a bigger rhetoric tool in especially Republican circles lately than it has before, stirring up fear over our neighbor to the south and all this stuff about people coming and drug trade, and I think they even mentioned rapists and criminals and all this other stuff, which is a very different tack than the Republican Party took way back in the day. I don't know if you've seen the video, but there's a video of George Bush Sr. and Reagan actually fighting over who was going to be more accommodating and humanizing the idea of immigration, and how, you know, a child shouldn't feel like they are illegal just in who they are, because not a human being is not illegal. You know, their status should not be illegal.
Yeah, and a large part of even Reagan's platform for immigration was amnesty. So there's a big disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we could spend probably all day talking about specifically just the Republican Party and their interesting views on immigration when it comes to that. But there's also been other stories in the news. We had a man that was assaulted on the East Coast for his religion. We've had the recent story about the young man in Texas who was handcuffed and treated poorly because he built a clock. So I think that this seems to be the underlining issue between all these things, is this idea of xenophobia, being scared of the other.
This is different from racism, does it include racism? I mean, I know the ideas are related, but how are you thinking about this? Is xenophobia an umbrella term for these kinds of things?
I think so.
Yeah, xenophobia is the fear of people you consider outsiders. So if it's, you know, race, someone moves into the neighborhood that's not your skin color and you see them as an outsider, that would be xenophobia. But they're not mutually exclusive, but they're not the same terms either. So basically just being afraid of people who are culturally different than yourself, which in America is a problem because there's a lot of people who are culturally different and people from, you know, all over. We are the great big melting pot, right?
Yeah, but it's really scary for some people to stretch their imaginations in that way, to think of the U.S. as being a truly diverse place. And I'm thinking about a lot of the people who feel this way are very vocal conservative Christians, right? Because a lot of times it's wrapped up in mistrust of other religions, or a sort of triumphalism, like Christianity should be the reigning main dominant religion, and a lot of times this is the same groups of people who want to keep Christian prayer in schools and things like that, and want to keep, you know, the Ten Commandments in public places, and don't want to embrace religious diversity or ethnic diversity or diversity of or sexual diversity, sexual orientation diversity. So where did we get, though, is my question. Where do we get from the Bible talking a lot about welcoming the stranger, and like, if your friends don't come to your dinner party, go out on the highways and byways and just find anybody who will come and bring them into your home and feed them and take them in, and don't resist anyone who asks of you, to what we have today, where a lot of conservative Christians are just battened down. And I'm saying conservative Christians, and I don't think that's essentializing to like name that. It's mostly conservative Christians.
There's a reason for that. There's a reason that especially politically conservative people in our country are beginning to make the problem of immigration and other things a bigger part of their platform. And sociologists talk about how, like, during times of intensified economic unrest and like weakening political influence, people will become more xenophobic, or their xenophobia, their fear of these other people, will be exacerbated. I know that Christians in general, as far as I can tell, feel like they're losing political power left and right. And conservatives also feel like they're losing political power, especially with the rulings in the past. And even though it might not seem like they're exactly related, that losing power like that has triggered, in my mind at least, some reaction from the conservative base to have like a xenophobic outlook and worried about having all these people coming here who are different than us taking over our politics. And in a democratic society, you have to be worried about that, because they'll have their fair share and they can say what they want and vote the way they want. And, you know, we're just going to be lost in the midst, in the noise. There was one time I was at a restaurant and I was reading the subtitles on some TV show, I think it was Glenn Beck, and literally said on air, we white people need to have more babies because the people coming from other countries, especially Mexico, are having enormous amounts of children. And if they have all these children, they're going to breed our culture out of existence. And that was said on national television. And I remember thinking, like, there's something uniquely wrong about that.
Alan, to your point, I think it's more than that. I think that throughout the consistency of xenophobia is the idea of people holding power. But I think the reason that it's heightened right now is I think this is the end result of how we responded to specifically, but then everything related to that around 9/11. Because we have, like, I mean, let's look at the word xenophobia. The core of that is fear. So these people are reacting to fear because they have this scenario in their brain that has been perpetuated since 9/11 by both sides of the news, but especially one particular station, that if they come here, then more of this is going to happen. More of that is going to happen. And everything has become about terrorists and who's going to do this. And our whole rhetoric around the other is because we're afraid of something big. And I think when you put someone in a position by the way that you talk about like end of the world type rhetoric, then of course people are going to respond, you know, badly, like really badly. I mean, even look at the debates that happened recently on the Republican side. Even if you didn't agree before, if you listened to some political speeches, you'd feel, and I don't know where I heard this before, but you'd feel, you know, somewhat inspired. There'd be some kind of like, we can be this, we can move towards this, but it's all, you don't believe in this and you're not this and you can't be this. And the whole rhetoric has changed and it's created this culture of fear.
To be fair, like 9/11 was a very traumatic event for everybody, for all of us. It was hard, you know, and like it wasn't just a fear that's in our minds, but we saw it like in our streets, on television, and it really impacted people. And taking that trauma to a national and like global level, it's left like a deep scar on who we are. And you're right, it has colored our relations and our thought about other people. And so, you're right. And I think overgeneralizing and saying all of these people are going to do all of this to us, it has just increased that fear more than we had before.
Yeah, and I think they're the seeds of this though way predate 9/11, right? We have such a stratified history in this country, and a history that a lot of people aren't willing to really deeply look at. That our country was built on the backs of the other, or of entire communities of othered people, as in
Yeah.
slaves. Our country was built, like everything we have is built on slave labor. And so even after
and dispossessing Native Americans who were definitely
right,
the other.
absolutely othered.
Mhm.
Like and othering comes about when we don't get what we want, and so we create a system of ideas that allow us to treat the other people who are others to us as less than human. Like we retain this humanity. But even after slavery was abolished, even after Native Americans were dispossessed, then you have Jim Crow and all of the horrific, segregation and systematic segregation and injustices done. So this is what I think. I think that there is still a strong cultural memory of what it's like to be in a minority in this country. And I think white people are scared of becoming the minority because they remember being the aggressor toward minorities and are afraid of the retribution that might come a couple of generations later for their sins. I think, do you think that's a legit theory?
Yeah, I think so. But as an Irish, as a descendant of Irish immigrants, it's more like now it's our turn. You know what I mean? Like we were the stranger back in the day, and we were the one that was oppressed and the minority. And now it's like, once you have some sort of political power, you just do whatever you can do to protect it. Not to derail your argument, but
you're Irish and you're white, though. I mean, it's easy. It's much easier for you to assimilate and look like white normativity.
For sure.
And that's just simply not possible for people who have different colored skin.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, like, othering is a spectrum. There's degrees of othering. So there's othering as like Irish immigrants, but there's less barriers to becoming the norm or emulating the norm, whatever the norm is, that white people have placed themselves in the center of having the normal identity, therefore not an identity. Like, and everyone else has the cultural identity and the cultural heritage, but white people are the normal ones. Mm-hmm. And everything else. Like, for example, Black History Month. How come it's not just called History Month? It has to be called Black History Month. Like, do you know what I mean? It has to be qualified as like almost, and that it becomes lesser in that because it's inherently othered.
So yeah, in other episodes, we talked about racism and white normativity and what does it mean to be white or not white and how those things work in our society. But for this episode, talking about xenophobia in specific, about fear and how fear functions in that, maybe it is what you're saying, Mona. Maybe it is legit to say that we are worried our chickens are going to come home to roost, that we are going to be paid back as people who had been in power when we're no longer in power in culture and society and politics. That could very much be it. But I think it's also a fear of, the unknown, like xenophobia in general. Just like that we fear what we don't know and we make assumptions and we tell ourselves stories of foreigners without truly engaging foreigners. So that's the kind of thing that gets spun and that is a big part of our cultural mindset. And so we get worried when we see someone, who looks different than us or dresses different than us, who comes from a different country. Or we get worried when people want to be when people are refugees fleeing from some horrible circumstances and they're asking for admittance to our culture. We're worried that, they're going to let in, the terrorists and the rapists and the criminals and all those kinds of things. So that kind of language is very insidious in how we think about people who are others.
Well, I think that it still goes back to that idea of normative, like what we fear something because it's not normal. So if we are subjecting ourselves to a constant stream of a certain type of rhetoric or surrounding ourselves with a certain type of person and we're not going outside of that, then we're creating an even greater opportunity for fear. So that's what I think in all of this. I think there's a huge responsibility, which no one has really taken up. There should be greater accountability for news stations and people that are saying that we're giving you the facts, but creating this narrative for people to isolate themselves and increase their fear.
Jeff, that's interesting.
Media Matters is good for that, by the way. Media Matters is an organization that does exactly what you mentioned, Jeff.
That's really interesting. Telling ourselves stories that, normalize us and make other people strange. That's funny considering the fact that, especially in the United States, we're such a thin slice of humanity and humankind that we are actually the weird ones and the rest of the world is normal because we're very different. And considering the fact that there's 60 million human beings right now who are displaced, whether internally or externally, due to things like war and persecution, economic persecution. And that's more than there's ever been in the history of the world. The fact that 1 in every 122 people on our planet is a refugee should take away the stigma of being an immigrant or a refugee, of being the other, because they're no longer people who are just the other wandering into our camp or whatever. That's the norm in our society. That's the norm in our culture around the globe, is that there are people everywhere who are displaced. So it's nothing that we can just afford to think about ourselves as normal and them as not normal, because
there really is no us and them.
No,
that's a fiction itself.
Mm-hmm.
We do have such a fear-based culture, and it's amazing that we have such a fear-based culture, because the most violence that is done is us to ourselves through like gun violence and aggression and homicide and things like that. Like, we have more gun deaths than like almost the rest of the world combined, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean to say by that is this fear that we perpetuate to try to keep the violence out actually creates the violence itself in our own turf.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really strong argument to be made for that. And so because we tell ourselves these stories, we have an inherent mistrust of even our neighbors. Even our neighbors become the other. Even our neighbors who look slightly different than us, but still live in the same housing development or the same apartment complex, and we see them walking our dogs. Like, this fear to me is so self-perpetuating that it causes us to mistrust everybody.
That's really interesting. You saying the word neighbor just triggered in my mind. Like, I was thinking about you saying, how do we get from Jesus' teachings to where we are now? And hearing Jesus say, like, forgive your neighbor 70 times 7, not just 7. You know what I mean? Having a forgiving attitude presupposes that someone might sin against you, but you're not retaliating. So, like, the idea of treating a neighbor... Isn't that
starting from a place, though, where they're doing something wrong against you?
Well, yeah, if your neighbor sins against you, if our worst fears are confirmed and someone does something against us or whatever, Jesus tells his followers in the Bible to be forgiving. And it's like, assuming someone's going to do something horrible to you and acting first, the preemptive fear of the stranger shortcuts that. You can never even like get to a place of forgiving someone who's different than you and who wrongs you if you're taking the step to wrong someone first. An author named M.W. Watts in 1996 talked about xenophobia as discriminatory potential. It's pretty interesting to say, the fear of the other, that's what xenophobia is. But if you look at it from a different perspective, it's just this potential energy to discriminate against another person. That's really what it is. And so when you trigger that, that's when discrimination happens. Talking about it in that sense is taking it away from the perspective of I'm scared of other people and other people are going to be discriminated against because of the things that are happening inside of me.
I don't understand that participatory energy thing.
No, discriminatory potential. Xenophobia is potential discrimination stored up inside of a person. And when it gets triggered, that's when the discrimination happens against others. Does that make sense?
Oh, interesting.
It's like kinetic energy. Kinetic energy or whatever.
Yeah.
Where it's like stored up. That's what
How
xenophobia
does it get there,
is.
though?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It gets there because they've constructed a norm that doesn't include all of those things. I think even now we have less and less of excuse because of technology. I know technology seems to be like the scapegoat for everyone. Well, texting is ruining our conversations and blah, blah, blah. But I think that we have less and less of excuse to expand the world in which we live in and the world in which we understand and who we consider the other and part of what we do because of technology, because of the computer and everything that we have. And it becomes less, not that it was ever justifiable, but it becomes less and less justifiable to trap ourselves in these small realities and these small perceptions of what is normal and what is right and what is the only way to go, because we have so much information and so many ways to connect ourselves with others.
Yeah,
but a lot of those are illusory. I mean, like, I understand Facebook and news and this and that, but it's a wholly different thing to be in a city. Like, I live right now on my street. There are people of completely different cultures in this one tiny little block. And it's a very powerful reminder to me that, like, we can live together, even though, an Orthodox Muslim family is right next door, and across the way there is an African-American family, and there's all these different people in this one little neighborhood. And that's a powerful reminder to me of like what the world looks like. But I grew up in a very white town with very similar attitudes toward the world and politics. And so back then, when you saw stuff mixing, it wasn't quite the same. You could talk about not fearing strangers in that setting, but it didn't quite mean the same thing, because until something affects us on a very personal level, like in an embodied level, it doesn't really affect us. Maybe in a
I agree if you're talking about change, but if you're talking about establishing a norm, so with the next generation or whatever, I think that it gets progressively better because of certain things. Like, we live in a predominantly white area, so when our girls were born, we were thinking, well, what are we going to do? We need to make sure. I don't want them to have that, you know, they did that study about people looking at pictures of people from different ethnic backgrounds and how their brain responded because it was so outside of their norm. And we were trying to think, like, what do we do? So the only thing that we can do, which is a helpful thing during this stage of their brain development, is making sure that the media they watch is diverse, that this cartoon character or this television character that they're watching or the books that they're reading, that they see on a regular basis these things. So yeah, I think that those things don't make a huge difference when it comes to, there's that difference between I need to change, and there's that difference between how do I establish a new consistent reality. And I think that those are the different lines that we need to look at.
It's interesting, those subliminal over time messages, like you're talking about. It's like a bank account. Like it's some things that get stored up as your general perceptions, right? Because we learn about our worlds through modeling and through taking in patterns and forming those patterns even unconsciously. So I noticed, like, recently I've been watching the show Treme. Have I talked about this yet?
No.
Okay. If so, I apologize, because I've been telling everybody about how great this show is. But the cast, it's made by the same guy as The Wire. The cast is like, all the main characters are either like black, white. There's a Vietnamese character. There's a pretty actually racially integrated cast, and I didn't realize how strange that would be for me to get used to watching main characters with depth of character, developed characters with lots of lines who did not look like me. And that was totally eye-opening. I'm like, here I am, like, thinking that I'm this progressive liberal, who's very open-minded, but it's still strange to my sensibilities to regard people who have darker skin than me as being complex, non-token individuals. They're not just thrown in there for a diversity plug, and I think that's what you're kind of trying to get to say, Jeff. Like, diversity goes more than just like having representation, but it goes to representing full, complex human beings that have full humanity, because that's some of the worst atrocities of history, right? Is dehumanizing people who are not the norm. So
absolutely.
So it's a long process that's very educational to unlearn the xenophobia that we have inculcated inside of us, right?
Absolutely. That's really well said. I've been thinking about a quote by Bertrand Russell from Unpopular Essays, and he said, "Collective fear stimulates herd instinct and tends to produce ferocity towards those who are not regarded as members of the herd." And so it makes me think about what we've talked about in the past of needing to know our neighbors and needing to know those around us and build relationships, and needing to know the herd. Okay, what am I trying to say? Let me back up a second.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Wait. Well, okay. So who is our herd today? Because we're more and more scattered. Like, I don't know my neighbors. I see them sometimes, and like we look at each other really cautiously. Like, are you going to punch me or something? I don't know. Like, do you guys know your neighbors? First of all, and I think second of all, like I don't think we're going to change those things culturally of the not knowing those around us. And being in a relationship with them, being friends with them instead of mistrusting them, until we have like real incentive. Because back in the day, I had incentive to know my neighbor because I might actually run out of food, and we depended on each other. So what could be the incentive to reconnect that tissue
and to reconnect? Theological one.
Okay.
For me, it's the incarnation, Jesus becoming flesh. I think if you're going to build your reality, the way you look at the world and religion, on the fact that God became human in this incarnation and embraced, human, in my religion, in my form of Christianity, human beings are not God. Like, we exist in God, we're connected with God, but there still is this very distinct difference between human beings and God. And when Jesus comes on the scene and God becomes human, it's like God moving into the neighborhood. I forgot who said that. Someone said the incarnation is God moving into the neighborhood. God becoming one of us, God dwelling with us, living with us. So if that's the central moment of history in my mind, and that's the focus of my religion, how could I not be the same? How can I not look at people around me and do what Jesus did in the ultimate, Jesus' ultimate act, which is becoming human? To follow Jesus is to embrace people who are different than me and to live with, in, and among them,
Yeah, I do. And I understand that on an intellectual plane, but actually translating that into American culture seems so hard.
It's actually super easy. I know it sounds super hard.
Do you know your neighbors?
Yes. And it's super difficult to get over the initial awkwardness, maybe. But if you just do it one time and you see any sort of response from people, is like a snowball effect. And I would say like 99% of people's neighbors, if you do something kind toward them, they respond so well. People are hungry for connection. I know it doesn't seem like it because maybe, you're on the subway, people don't want to talk to each other or whatever, but like genuine connection, not just networking yourself, not just, trying to get something, but actually just connecting to someone on a human level, more often than not. It's been my experience that people respond positively to that.
Maybe. I don't know. I think maybe we're taking the word neighbor too literally. Like, I don't think that just because I don't know who my next door neighbor, like I've had horrible next door neighbors. I've hated every single one of them. Like I had a neighbor in my last place that like threatened to call Child Protective Services on me because I didn't clean up my dog crap. I have a neighbor right now who's, I don't know what her deal is.
Wait. To be fair, the person who threatened to call didn't actually ask you to pick up dog.
No, but this was after. This was after I sat down with this person on their porch and had a meaningful conversation with them about where I was at, and letting them know that, oh, we didn't realize it was so important to you. We'll for sure do it. And I waited like 2 days because I had to work and I didn't get it to it fast enough. And then he goes all passive aggressive on me. Anyway, that's my. But what I'm saying is, and Alan, in your situation, your neighbor because they're roughly your age. They're also a couple. Like you have a lot in common in the beginning. So I think we.
I was actually thinking of the lady who lives across the street from me, who's 80 years old and African American, and we talk to each other. I wasn't thinking about the people right next to us, but yeah, I do have neighbors that we absolutely love because they're like the image of myself.
Yeah, but I don't think that how we know our neighbor is. I think we need to think of neighbor more in the like metaphorical term, like someone who is not part of, because we still have our tribes, we still have our groups, we still have the things that we're involved in, whether it's our job or whether it's our group of friends that we're still connected with or whatever. I don't think that's the issue as much as...
I think it is, man. I think that you just described the perfect petri dish for xenophobia. We do have our tribes. We do have people that think like us, that enjoy the same things as we do. And if those are the people that we constantly spend our time with, it's easy to not interact with people that are necessarily different than us. I mean, sure, there are people in my congregation who are from different countries and who are strangers, but we still kind of gravitate toward the same thing in the same place. To be in a neighborhood and to actually get to know the people that are living next to you, like, it might be countercultural and it might not be for everyone or whatever, but I think that itself is a way to start moving outside of being afraid of people that are different. I mean, I have a really big heart for it, obviously, and I do think my faith leads me to do that, and it's hard for me to see how people's faiths don't lead them to necessarily pursue that. And I wouldn't say it's wrong for someone not to know their neighbor, but...
Well, I certainly agree that the thing that baffles me the most is that the most xenophobic in our culture, at least, are claiming to also be followers of Jesus Christ, which for me, the arc of Scripture steadily, even from the Old Testament all the way to the end of Testament, and it doesn't even end with Jesus, moves away from, it starts with a family, moves into a tribe, moves into a nation, and then moves into this worldwide, way in which this message or these things of love should be applied to the world around us. Because even Jesus didn't really tell his followers, include, he did subtly, but not directly. He didn't include the Gentiles. He was very much, even had an interaction with the lady that said, I'm not going to give you the scraps from the table. Like Jesus did not preach his followers a worldwide change. He left that to the church, the people after, to move it beyond just that tribe in Israel. And I think that the movement of Christianity should be ever opening the door. The whole center of what we believe is creating a way for the out to be in, so that there is no more out.
So 2 things to that. Every Abrahamic religion begins with an immigrant. That's what Abraham was. Abraham went for the place that he was born and raised and moved through. That's the story, right? He moves through this land where he's a stranger. And then the Israelites, they're strangers in a foreign land and they're treated a certain way. That's like the story of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. We are people who know what being a stranger is, and that's what we're totally bred in. And secondly, that brings to mind a story. I once read a story by Shane Claiborne about Christians who went to the southern border of the United States with Mexico, and they sat in a semicircle on the border, and the other semicircle was on the other side of the border with Mexican national people who lived in Mexico. They weren't allowed in or whatever. And so they actually had communion in a church service on each side of the border. And it was something that was very threatening to the border patrol and to other people. And it's hard for me sometimes to think of the things connecting us across different cultures, but Christianity itself has been fractured from one society to the other. When we drop bombs on churches, right? A Christian dropping a bomb on a Christian below, and not that like their lives are more important because we believe in something, but even religion itself doesn't have the power in our weird nationalistic society, in our weird nationalistic global culture to bring us together across those boundaries. It's sad that that's a very rare thing.
Yeah, I think that nationalistic triumphalism is so antithetical to really reading the Bible.
but that's actually one of the pillars of xenophobia. So you have like discriminatory potential, right? You have it being intensified in economic and political disruption. But in another way, it is when you look at a world with a hierarchical view, like our nation is better than all other nations, our nation is triumphant and superior. That's when you get xenophobia, because these other people are not a part of us. They're not the triumphant ones. Yeah,
and I would take that a step further and say that it has to do with concepts of what civility is in general. And this comes out of colonial histories, plural. But the idea that, America has reached this epoch of civility, like we've built this great civilization, we have the world currency that's most significant or whatever. We have figured it out. We are the hotbed of culture.
Even in a banal setting, right? You think about what we eat and the way we eat. We look at other cultures that eat insects, which is a much more sustainable, higher protein, lower fat diet. We look at that and be like, that is uncivil. What they need to do is create huge factories and farms where animals are completely mistreated, and there's this company that's making money off of all the workers. Then they'll be in a civilized society, right?
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm going. Is that we have a conception of modernity and civilization and civility, and we say everyone who doesn't participate in that vision or buy into it is a barbarian.
So barbarian, like Rome and the Goths. That's right.
Yeah. And so the thing is, we don't even have to call anyone a barbarian. The simple claim that we are the most civilized, or that we are civilized, or that we are great necessitates othering, because we have to differentiate ourselves as having arrived at a point that others have not. And this is why in scholarly circles, people aren't saying first world and third world anymore, or developed and undeveloped. These terms are becoming passé because we're realizing that leads to a triumphalism, that there are some places and some cultures that are better and inherently smarter or more valuable or something like that. We in fact, a lot of the circles are starting to use the word majority world to represent what most of the world experiences, which is typically agricultural or a non quote unquote developed or industrialized or modernized setting. The majority of people in the world, the 2/3 world, or whatever you want to call it, that's the term that's people are going towards. So anyway, I think triumphalism and xenophobia, like you're saying, go totally hand in hand. And so it's making me think that like maybe the term xenophobia is not that helpful.
Yeah, so that's what I was about to say is like, this is really funny. Every time I talk about cosmetic fixes, you always have to go systemic and be like, well, the whole thing needs to be dismantled and we need to not look at each other as strangers. For me, I'm like, how do we get beyond the fear of the stranger? And you're asking the question, well, why do we call people strangers in the first place? Why?
No, I'm talking about the phobia part of it. So no, that's interesting that's how you said it.
So how do you move past the fear of people who you perceive to be like a threat or different or whatever? And all I can think of is like, is understand and educate yourself that not everybody is represented by the few who are actually criminals or whatever, like, or are actually committing acts of war and violence. Like,
But
instead
is it
of,
a phobia?
hmm?
That's what I'm asking. Is it actually phobia? Okay, so if you have arachnophobia, you have an irrational fear of spiders that's been conditioned. Like it happen, a phobia happens to you. But a lot of xenophobic behavior actually is hatred and then just called like, oops, my culture told me to fear them, therefore I was aggressive and
I would say
darn.
it's an actual. You're right. I don't think xenophobia should cover all acts of racism or all acts of hatred towards people who are different than us. I really do believe that there are good people who don't want to be racist, people who don't want to be these things, who do have xenophobia, who are afraid of stuff that I have things that I'm scared of that are different. It's just natural. Anytime a human being gets into an environment or comes up against some element that is different and we don't know what it is, fear is like the logical next step because we don't know what to expect next. And so you're actually asking people to not be xenophobic is to go against biology.
No, I agree. That's why I think you can't just say, "Hey, stop that." Because I even said, like, for my own example, watching that TV show, like,
Yeah.
I want to stop that, but there is an enculturation there. There is, I'm determined by my environment to see things in a certain way. I didn't grow up around Black people, therefore, I'm not going to know how to feel comfortable unless I go out of my way to build communities and get to know Black people. Or Muslims, or whoever we decide, But again, like, we are white people, therefore we're calling Black people different or the other, and so it becomes really problematic because the language breaks down at a point, right? Because it depends on your vantage point. It depends on what you're used to. It depends on who you grew up with.
And for me, that's why it's a very almost individualistic experience. Like, me wanting to be in my neighborhood and be with people that are different than me is me getting past my xenophobia. I really do believe the only antidote to fearing people is to actually sit down with them or talk with them or get to know them. That's it. I don't see any other way to get past that.
No, I don't know. I don't know.
Like, for real. I think everything else is completely
let Jeff
cosmetic.
talk. I want to know what you have to say, Jeff.
Well, I don't know. I think like you said, it's too individualistic to say that there's this one way to get past everything. Because quite honestly, if I'm walking down in a bad neighborhood, take race out of it, if a person is dressed a certain way, I don't even care if they're white, Black, Hispanic, or whatever, there's a part of me that's going to go on the other side of the street because there's some prudence to that. I'm taking into context the area that I'm in, what has happened here, all that kind of stuff. Like, there has to be this balance. And if my fear is perpetuated by certain events in my life because of where I live, then that's going to be harder for a fear to get over if I just talk to one person and sit down with them and realize that they're different. I can just chalk that up, they're the exception to the rule, and I'm not going to risk my life on an exception or whatever. You know what I mean? There's so many different layers and ways to attract this. That's why I think that to a certain extent, some people are just lost. It's always going to be that way, and it might change. And the more and more society changes the way that it looks at, the more they'll be on the out themselves, because we've done the reverse thing. I mean, look at it on a micro level. Look at like people who are more left leaning when it comes to, like, I don't know about you two, but I've gotten funny looks when I said I don't care if my produce is organic or not. You know what I mean? Like, there's this whole kind of shaming on in a food way,
That's because of where you live.
Well, exactly, because of where I live. But wherever I live, there's still going to be an in and an out depending upon where your perspective is. So I think you're right. It's a personal change, but if I have rage and I have hate inside of me, my culture is going to, based on whatever norm I have, is going to help me channel that rage into something else. So even if I solve that one, it's just going to be channeled into whoever else is the out at that moment or in my context or whatever. So because by talking about how do we deal with someone who's just hateful, I think we're talking about the exception and not the rule. And then we're trying to guide and say, well, we need to heal that person's hate. We might not be able to, but we can prevent broader things if we look at it more of a holistic thing. And I think it includes all those things. I think it includes both sides of the fence as far as our rhetoric and specific things that we can do to stop these things happening in different areas.
No, so maybe the antidote is just we all need the same enemy. We all need to have one giant enemy that we can all tackle as a human species, what we need to do is be invaded by mindless drones or something until we can all fight them and band together like in every sci-fi
We joke
movie.
about it, but a lot of sci-fi has been a way to satirize racism. Like, they've created a lot of shows were cutting edge for what they did because they knew if you were straightforward and said, here's a black person and a white person getting along, that people would reject it during a certain era in history. But if they used aliens and humans, then that was a little bit of a helpful step. Like, I think it takes artists to help us see things in a new way. I think it needs to be this collective, like, okay, it's not working. No one really has the solution. Let's try to work together on something. You know what I mean? I think we spend so many times trying to avoid conflict instead of walking through it.
Yeah, and I think the conflicts that arise, though, because a lot of times xenophobia messages are always kind of wrapped around a kernel of truth, and this is how a lot of propaganda works, right? There's one thing that happens that's, some person of color gets aggressive one time, and then all of a sudden you're able to demonize a whole group, right?
Yeah.
But what I want to mention, though, is that what often people don't remember is how traumatizing rejection is. Like, think about the times in your life when you've been utterly rejected by other people, and then imagine that as like your whole community is treated that way on a regular basis for no freaking reason except what you look like or how you act or who your sexual partner is or whoever.
Or just because people don't know you. You know what I mean? Just because they don't know your culture.
They don't understand or know you, or just because you are who you are, they've decided to reject you. So not even thinking about insiders or outsiders or others, but just they have rejected you before even speaking a word to you, right? Because of whatever label or identity that is associated with you. So what I'm trying to say is that the trauma and the frustration and the pain of having to go through that your whole life, like, it's a wonder that we don't have more uprisings. Like, there is a tremendous amount of patience and love and graciousness being showed to the norm, the core, that's not the right, you know what I'm trying to say, the core of the normativity from those who've been rejected. And so to see it from that perspective of like, okay, if there's some outbursts sometimes or people are expressing rage or anger or aggression, let's actually look at what they've been through in their life that would cause them to be upset, instead of just saying that entire group of people is malicious and inherently dangerous. That's what I would like to say in this episode, is like the crucial point is like looking at legacies of rejection and trauma and abuse within full communities. You know,
and you're asking for empathy on like a societal level, like actually thinking about people's situations and circumstances instead of just seeing it from your own perspective.
Yeah, and you know, I come from the cultural norm in this country, and I cannot comprehend, unless I really stretch my imagination and really think really hard, what it might be like to be rejected like that.
Or to be feared, right? Xenophobia is about fear. I don't know what it's like to be feared by other people. At least
my body's
my
never
experience.
been a threat to anyone,
ever.
I don't know what that's like.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, so it's, you know, this is a really hard one. We've been tired to talk about.
Well, I think that's a fantastic point, is that idea of asking the why question. Why is someone responding this way? Why are they reacting this way?
Is it helpful to build a different narrative? So our narratives have been tribal, nationalistic, all these things we brought up, and we're poo-pooing all these things, right? And we're saying maybe there's a different narrative that we can start to write, that all of humanity is in some way connected and responsible for one another, and we're not looking at each other as just the other, but first and foremost as human beings. Is that even possible or helpful to combat this sort of perspective?
Well, I don't think so, because we do have a hierarchy of humans in our, and I'll explain this in a sec, this will come together, but in like our legal system and our justice system does not see people the same, in that if you don't have a certain amount of wealth, if you get in any kind of trouble with the law, I'm talking like your license plate is expired or you get pulled over for a speeding ticket or whatever. If you get taken to jail, evidence has just come out recently. If you get taken to jail and you get assigned a public defender, they will have an average of 7 minutes to look at your case. 7 minutes. And 90% of the time, you will be forced to plead guilty because that public defender does not have time to review your case or represent you. So if if you fall under a certain wealth line, or you are prone to racial profiling because of what you look like, one of those two, if you commit the slightest infraction against the law, you are likely serving jail time, even if you did nothing wrong. So the law in our country doesn't see people the same. I think it's an easy answer to just be like, oh, we should just treat everybody like humans. But our very systems of governing our own people don't see everybody the same. Mm-hmm. So to tell somebody, you should just get over it when they have to walk around in constant fear that they're going to go to jail for walking down the street. I'm getting really upset about this right now because I don't have a frame of reference to understand, but I'm trying really hard to understand what it could be like to live under that stress all the freaking time and never to be able to escape from it.
Yeah.
So it's so much more complicated than just let's all love each other.
Yeah, and so that's actually, I just preached a sermon recently on Psalm 146. You talked about us welcoming the stranger and how God looks over the stranger, and we talked about refugees. The thing that I have heard and that I said to my congregation was that these are complex problems. Like the refugee crisis right now is a very complex problem, and it demands complex answers. So I wouldn't want to come off on the show saying the answer is just to think of people as people and not as issues, but that's still an element of building structures and of interacting with our neighbors, is seeing people as people before we see them as issues. You know what I mean? Seeing refugees as human beings instead of just this larger issue might be a good place to start. I don't know.
I think it's a good place to start, but I think that the idea of complication is true. And I think the reason it's so difficult is that if we start with that premise or that value of people are people, not issues, I think that's a good place. But we don't have a structure to talk to one another, or at least hear other people talk to another that acknowledges complications. Everything's trying to get an answer or a soundbite, and no one, there's no room for nuance. I just watched one of the more recent episodes of South Park, and one of the kind of ongoing thing was you were either for Caitlyn Jenner or you were against Caitlyn Jenner. And if you said one negative thing or had one critique or were critical of Caitlyn Jenner in any way, then you were all against her and you should die because you're a horrible person. You know what I mean? There's no room for saying, for instance, when Mona talks about this idea of let's listen to why people are upset, and still acknowledge we value that, we need to really get to the bottom of that, but then also not agree with everything that they are, but not disagree with everything that they are. I don't know, when I think about this, it always comes to mind is NWA from the 90s. They just did their movie Straight Outta Compton. But they brought to attention on a national level that hadn't been done before, this is what's going on in these areas, in these major cities. And that was important. But if you listen to their album, there's also horrible treatment of women and all this other stuff. And it can't be this, you have to fully accept everything this person does or you don't accept anything. There has to be room for nuance and discussion. But if it's not modeled for us, even with our leaders, our political leaders, then how are we supposed to create a new norm that gives people the freedom to, discuss and have complicated questions and discussions?
Yeah, you're right. You bring up some good points. And what is the incentive of our media and our stories that we tell to ourselves? What really drives us
when people see something they're experiencing on television and it's just a drumbeat effect to their own feelings, that gets the higher ratings. I think that's why all the xenophobic stuff on television with politics and all that stuff, I think people are feeling like they have less political power than ever. And when they see people pushing xenophobia like that, it's one element of their makeup that they see in themselves. And so it resonates within them. And ironically, it creates more xenophobia. And then that's, it's like a never ending cycle. But I think that's what people want to see is themselves.
Fear sells. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
This is economically motivated.
Yes. It strikes a chord in the human biological system and people respond to it. And that makes money for some people.
And that is a victim of the own system. If all of our rhetoric is black or white, you're either this or you're that. And even someone like Trump, because I'm trying to rack my brain on why he's been so popular with a lot of people, there's a certain element to the idea of speaking your mind and not caring about what society has constructed as what's good and what's bad. And I think that there's an attraction to that where it's wow, there has to be more room to speak more than I don't, you know what I'm trying to say? Like that.
Yeah, to say what you're feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's
hiding who you are.
It feels good to yell at someone. It feels good to let something go inside of you, and you may have regret after. But we don't even let people have the room. So if we repress what people are frustrated with for so long and tell them you can't be mad at that or you can't do that, and then they get an opportunity to kind of let that out, we need to have room in our society for people to let that out on a regular basis. If we look at it as a person, you can't bottle up your feelings. You need to have a safe place where you can maybe go off course a little bit to help you work through things. And we don't have that on a cultural, like, broad-based level in our country, I don't think.
So you're like psychologically evaluating society. You're like, you need to name your fear so we can work through it.
Kind of, yeah.
That's what you're saying.
I think there's something attractive about Trump's like vitriolic approach that he just says shit. In an age where everyone has to be careful and watch their speech and temper their speech because we're trying. We're not doing a very good job, but we're trying to be inclusive and sensitive to everyone. And it's hard. It's very hard work to get there. But in that, we have to almost temper our feelings and our emotions to the point where we almost become these kind of flim-flammy kind of creatures who can't speak out really powerfully and strongly against injustice when it does happen. And I know, like, Slav Zizek, which is a famous philosopher, when the Charlie Hebdo massacre came and he was writing about terrorism and ISIS and being like, why the heck can't liberals in particular call out fundamentalist aggression? Because we're so afraid of being xenophobic, so there's an other side to this of being afraid of being fearful, and therefore we become completely locked into immobility. Like, we can't do or say anything, and we become almost apathetic. Like, anyway, it's really complicated. It's really complicated to have a powerful voice in society, and I think people are attracted to that. I think that's why Trump has taken up so much speed, because people want someone to look to.
So once again, we end at a place where we don't know. We'll figure it out. So before we close out this conversation, give us your takeaway. Just a sentence or two. What's your last word?
My answer all along has been, just get to know your neighbors. That's it. That'll fix everything.
Okay, no, it will not fix everything.
It will.
Is my last word. However, I have been thinking that a stranger is one conversation away from a friend. Think about it.
And I want to say, don't take the word neighbor too literally.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, I agree with you.
Well, we have the atomic and the systematic and the human and the meta all wrapped into one.
Meta about our meta-ness.
Exactly.
Well, hey, you listener are strange to us, but you don't have to be. You can have a conversation with us, right? And you can become our friends. Mm-hmm.
Yes,
be our friends.
By letting us know what you think. And we say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but we tend to end these conversations on a note that really leaves it open for everything. And when we say thanks for joining the conversation, we hope that you do. So if you have anything to add to this conversation in particular, you can do it at the show notes at irenacast.com/30. And there you can also find informational links to go a little bit deeper on some of the stuff that we talked about. Before we close out, we're going to play a little round of Say What. All right. So we are bringing back Say What. And if you don't remember our 6th episode, this is how it works. Is basically it's word association, right? So we say a word and then the other people say whatever comes to their mind right away without thinking, which, like we said before, if you know us, this is very difficult at times.
In the spirit of talking about prejudging people we don't know, we're just going to say the first thing that comes to our mind, like good xenophobes, right? We're going to speak before thinking. That's it.
Great.
There's some
that's my favorite
psychologist that's listening to our show on a regular basis. It's like,
it's like, man, Alan's amazing. Oh,
they're like taking notes. Like, they're going to send us.
They're going to write some dissertation on us.
They're going to say,
I guess that's reverse xenophobia, right? We're so important that someone's writing a paper on us.
A paper that no one's going to read except for us. That's great.
I'm not going to read that paper.
I'll read it.
I prefer my ignorance.
Because it's about me.
Yeah, when I read Plato's idea of the philosopher king, I did think of myself, so I can see how that would.
You were into Plato. I was going to use the example from The Matrix. I'm Cyrus, and I just want to be plugged back in.
Very nice.
All right. So who wants to go first?
I will. I like talking. Okay, here we go. Here's the word. Clear your mind. Completely take it all out of your brain and just listen to the sound of my voice. Are you guys ready?
I'm creeped out.
Okay. The word is easy.
Peanut butter.
E.
E?
Yeah, I just thought of easy E. Well, we talked
Dude,
about Straight Outta Compton, and that's my
okay.
brain. That's where I'm at.
Got it. Rapping. Why did you think of peanut butter, Mona?
It's easy to spread when it's creamy.
It is. So you don't do chunky. You go for the like.
I don't discriminate against my peanut butters, but to be honest, like it's just there's something really comforting in like creamy peanut butter. But I do have a theory that for me, that foods that are easier to chew taste better. Like I like foods that are slightly. I'm kind of like an old lady. I like foods that are soft, like mashed potatoes, meatloaf, lasagna. Like to me, that's like that increases the appeal. All right, I'll go. Ready?
Yeah.
Ostrich.
Egg.
I just thought of egg. I thought of a giant egg, and I always wanted to crack one open. I don't know why.
That's funny. You guys.
I think of Nacho Libre, where he has to like travel to the top of that cliff and eat the eagle's egg.
Eagle's egg.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of ostrich where I lived. Yeah, and their eggs just like crazy, huge rocks is what they look like. Always made me hungry.
They look like dinosaurs. What?
Get on the food.
Eat that?
I want to cook one day.
It's like the size of your head. It's kind of cool.
How big would that omelet be? I wonder.
I don't know if I could do an omelet with that. I think it'd just scrambled eggs.
Jeff, let's do it. Next time we hang out, I'll buy the egg.
Let's do it. Right? Let's do it.
Buy an ostrich?
Seriously. Let's do it.
For real?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm down. We think we could hard boil that.
But
baby?
It has to be a happy ostrich.
The black
market
of ostrich products.
I'm sure you could buy one.
Okay. Is it my turn? Okay. Doohickey.
I just thought of a hickey on the neck. I just went to speaking of hickeys, I just went to a phone store this last week, and the person working there had the tattoo of a hickey on their neck, like a legit tattoo. I'm not even joking.
How do you
like
do that?
Big lips, kind of, on their neck. I was like, that's an interesting choice. He was like a gangster. He was like legit, and he had this huge hickey on his neck, and it just didn't, fit in my cosmology of gangsters.
So the first thing that came to your mind was basically my word.
Well, you said the word
and
hickey.
Also, I knew a kid.
How can you think of anything else?
I said doohickey.
I know.
Yeah, hickey.
But I think of hickey. It's too strong of a word. It just, do disappears. I knew a kid who used to give himself hickeys with a hose of a vacuum. It's pretty awesome.
Oh.
I thought of that too.
And be like, hey guys, I'm so embarrassed.
That's right.
Oh, no.
I'm so embarrassed, dude.
Wait, Mona, did you say hickey too?
Yeah, I said hickey too. Well, actually, but I had a friend wearing a really nice scarf today, but it's not that cold out. And I was like, oh, hey, are you getting your fall weather attire on? And they got really embarrassed and then showed me their hickey.
I don't get hickeys. I don't get there's.
Well, sometimes they just happen by accident.
Out.
No, no. Okay, look, I've gotten one before. I just don't understand what they like. The appeal in that.
Well, I don't think there is an appeal.
Is it like marking someone? Is it like peeing on a building or something for a dog?
No, not at all. It's not at all like that.
I don't get it.
Maybe I'm confused. People don't do it on purpose.
Feels good to get a hickey.
Do they? Like outside of like adolescence, people don't do it on purpose.
I don't think they do it on purpose.
Yeah, it's not
Really?
like hey, let's get.
How do you
hickeys.
accidentally like destroy the capillaries in someone's neck? That's
Alan, do I need to explain to you how making
no, you don't.
You need to talk to your parents about this.
We need to stop
You
veering.
talk to your wife about this.
We need to stop veering into Alan's. Yeah.
You're the one asking.
You're the one that did it.
I was a curious boy. All right. That's what I.
All right. Well, if you're that curious, you are married, and you can go experiment for yourself and see what the big deal is about.
Yeah. Married for 9 years. That's crazy.
Let us know how it
Jeff
goes.
for like 30, right?
Shut up.
You didn't watch Xena. You're pretty old.
Yeah. Right.
Who's
All right.
next?
Alan.
I'm up again.
Yeah,
All right,
go,
here's the
Alan.
word. You ready? Clear your mind from all the hate.
Jeff's really mad.
The word is trendy.
Hipsters with hickeys on their necks in tattoo form.
You just can't get the hickey out of your head, can you?
I can't. What
about you, Jeff? Do you
Maybe
think
let
of
me try again. Wait.
trendy.
Fabric with geometric patterns. came to my mind. That's
Like
not a word, but that's
like chevrons and stuff.
yeah, basically like trendy fabric.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Jeff?
I don't know why, but the first thought was the color pink.
Like in the 80s, someone has a pink like fanny pack and it's so trendy.
Hot shorts. Yeah, definitely. I think Jeff, you would have a pink fanny pack.
Yeah.
I had a lime green fanny pack. Thank you very much.
Oh my god, can you guys imagine Jeff with a hipster mustache?
I can't. I can.
I have a picture on my Facebook of a hipster mustache.
No, you do
No,
not.
not
Yes,
one
I
of those.
do.
You mean the giant?
Like
No,
one
he's
that
referring
with
to
the
a
curls
fake
up.
No,
he's-
I curled it. Like last year when I had this big, huge beard, and I shaved it because the girls were really pulling on it, and it hurt real bad. So I shaved it up, and I did a progression picture in the comments of that picture, and it showed me with the beard, and then with it trimmed, and then I took the whatever mustache I had, and I curled it up just for one picture, and then that's it.
I will say you have
Put that
some
on Facebook.
you have some Italian in your family history, and it really came out when you did like the curly mustache. It's pretty awesome.
Hipster Jeff. I'm just still trying to picture it. Can you put that on the Facebook page for the show?
No, that's only for my private Facebook friends.
Yay!
Come on.
He's so scared of everybody else seeing it that he's going to, exercise his right to xenophobia. And
We're all
not restrict himself.
gonna fear you and hate you.
It was actually, I'm pretty sure it's the only selfie I've ever taken.
Did you guys know though that selfies are very dangerous to your health?
I heard.
Did you hear the statistic
Yep.
that more people died trying to take selfies last year than got eaten by sharks?
Yep.
So I didn't really selfies were that dangerous.
Is that really
guys.
true?
It really is true. People do all the time. You can look at any tourist site and look up the history of people who have expired because they were trying to take a selfie on some ledge, and there's just so many.
I know that's pretty
Oh
morbid,
my
but that's
God.
hilarious. Like that is
That's
so funny to me.
That's
so
the
funny
Darwin
to me.
Awards level of. But it's so sad.
It's just
God,
ironic.
what a
It's
horrible
Sad,
thing
but
to
it's
do.
also like, come on.
It's sad because they're trying to capture a moment.
That's commitment to your art right there.
Yeah, that's a way to look at it.
All right.
Anyway, Mona, your
Have we
word.
done our second? Okay, ready?
Have we finished yet?
The word is tweezers.
I just thought of eyebrows.
I did too.
It's actually really sad.
Do you have a unibrow?
Every time we play this, no, I don't. Every time we play this game, it like triggers some horrible childhood memory of mine, and I start talking about it. I had a little bit of red above my eyebrows growing up when I was in like elementary school. I don't know why. I'd play at recess or something, and
Because you're half
the
leprechaun.
blood. Yeah, I know because I'm Irish. The blood flowed to the top part of my eyebrows, and then all the girls would make fun of me. Oh, did you poke your eyebrows? Do you pluck them? Now I think of that when I think of tweezers. Isn't that sad?
Oh, I'm
Or-
sorry to bring that up for you, Alan.
Thank you for. There's no trigger warning or anything on that one.
All right, well, that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you hear, you can help support the show by going to iTunes and Stitcher to rate, review, and subscribe. Your ratings and reviews really help the show by making it easier for others to find us. You can contact us anytime at our feedback page at irenicast.com/feedback. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation.